Good morning, y'all. Hey, hey. Good morning, good morning. Uh, hey, folks. So, I'm Therese Nelson, back at it again this beautiful Monday afternoon with this conversation collaboration between Black food folks and Afropunk. We are into our fifth month, and the conversations have been so rich and dope. Last week you all was so lit in the comments when we had Lauren Darnell, and this week I am so excited to have my good friend and very brilliant executive director, former executive director, current uh, special projects director for Just Food to talk to us about the mechanism of mission based work. So let me see. I see it right here. A Miss Qiana Mickie. Let's see. Hey,
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm always glad to see your face in time of COVID. I feel like we haven't seen each other in person for so long. So these conversations are just dope to get a chance to just see your face, but also really talk out some things. It's I think sometimes um, especially being in New York, I think we get glamour into thinking we're more connected than we are. And I feel like these
Yeah.
conversations have been so dope and like getting to really sit with someone for a little while in ways that we don't typically get to.
I'm excited to
So
be here. And
yeah,
yeah, you're right. It's like we feel like we're so connected and yet we're in many ways like distant. So I'm happy to be a part of the conversation.
yeah. Okay, so like I said to you
Yeah.
guys, we're in our fifth month of this. At the beginning of these conversations, it was really just kind of check-in. I think a lot of us were feeling rudderless, right? Like we weren't sure what this moment was going to feel like and be like, and um, it was a lot of first weeks were really kind of talking to people like Karen Washington and folks who were kind of giving us a sober, calming moment. I think as we've kind of evolved into this moment, I've really been thinking about talking to folks who really have best practices and tools to help us think through tangible, specific action items to get active, like and involved in sort of food systems work. And you are precisely the kind of person that I would want to talk to because of your experiences. Um, I guess I want to start at the beginning. I mean, I know you're from like the DMV area, and
hmm
your educational background really didn't have anything to do with food in the very
Nope.
beginnings, but like talk through your sort of origin story, but then how you kind of what was the spark to get you involved in the food space?
Oh yeah. So fun fact, I was born in Richmond, Virginia. Some folks don't know that. My parents met, my mom is a New Yorker, she grew up in the Bronx, but my parents met when my mom went to Hampton briefly and then Benedict College. So my dad's family roots are still in Virginia, in Richmond, and it's growing up here, my parents separated two and a half. I moved here to New York, so I really grew up in the Bronx, but I still have like roots in the South and with that side of my family. And I think it kind of helped me bridge two different worlds because my parents are very different. The spaces were very different. And I think it kind of helped me kind of grow into a person that wanted to be a part of multiple places, even though I'm a little quirky and not fully involved in any. But like, how do I connect with different folks? And so I think that's even before my food work, that was always like a part of me and a part of, I think, how I didn't maybe think about it in that way, but approached work and wanted to find ways to get whether it was goods or services or people together who typically don't get them. And so
Mm,
there had been this trajectory of wanting to be a creative person, even though I don't feel like I'm an artist or creative, and finding a way to like connect to that. And
yes.
how it like jumps into food was actually Being a mom at a certain point, I had my son fairly young. My son's 22 now. I was 22 when I had him. And that kind of forced me, as well as my health and stress of work and working in nonprofits, entertainment section, sports production, realizing like there was something connected to food. And I kind of had to go all the way back to the basics. And that kind of opened up the opportunity to intersect with volunteering and connecting with more of my community and wanting to do that more. And so I took that as an opportunity to get involved in Harlem around certain things, and then heard about this community advocacy training at Just Food. And the group I was with at Heart in Harlem were like, "Oh, can you go and bring the tools back?" And that actually opened the door to not just community advocacy, but connecting it to food in a different way. And also it opened the conversation of policy. And then I started to see like how there was this disconnect, or what I felt was like a disconnect to folks that were experiencing this in a real way, and the policies and how they're being like built and taught or developed. So it's like, yeah, we can vote, but somebody's building these policies. And why aren't we the ones doing that? And why aren't there more of us? So to hear that to learn in a training that there were grassroots mechanisms or tools and organizing that help that, I kind of wanted to be a part of that. So, some folks come into the space culinary wise or growing. I felt for me, the challenge for me as an individual was to do something that I never did before, which is policy, but maybe leverage some of my skill set and just like natural ways. And I guess it's kind of worked. And, over the course of a couple of years, it became, I think what I'm starting to see now, I didn't really call it this before, was like I always wanted to have impact. I wanted to have collective impact, not just on my own merit, but collaboratively with other folks. And I wanted to see it more and more. So it became, I don't want to just be a community advocate. I think I need to do this for work. I need to be a part of the change. I need to be a part of the impact. And I want to see that there's some lasting elements to this. And so I think there was something around impact. I think building like a proof of concept that we should be centered. And when I say we, I'm definitely talking about folks of color, in particular, Black, Brown, Indigenous folks, women, mixed income. Why when I started in policy, it was so white driven, male driven, but that wasn't our experience. And there was these tokenized ways that folks of color were engaged in the work. And I just over time wanted to kind of be a part of moving and shifting that. So it's not just me, but just being a part of that. And so I think now I kind of see it in that way, where it's how to continue to find ways to dismantle purposeful inequities, how to really build, redefine resources, or find ways to invest where we've been divested from, and really calling it what it is, and the work be that. So it doesn't just mean food is fun. It doesn't just mean we go outside and we just do one, rally. It's like, I really want to see some really instrumental change, and I want to do this with other folks. How do we really do this? And we make money, and we do what's right for the land, and we can do it with each other, and there's just a better way to do it than other people have.
100%. There's like so many things to unpack and all of that. One of the things that I wanted to, just a couple things. One is the part you said about bringing the skill set you have to this space that you see you can be of service. Somebody made a comment early on, I'm not gonna scroll back, but a couple comments ago, talking about the diversity of the food space and how many opportunities there are for work, and kind of finding a lane or finding space, and just finding room for yourself professionally in the food space. There's so many opportunities that people don't think about outside the kitchen. And there was something in that I'm always struck by when I think about your story, because you think about people who have expertise in, like you, marketing, people who have backgrounds in, we need lawyers. There are all kinds of folks who are doing work in industries that they don't think tie back to the food space that could absolutely be of service to this area. But there's something in the last part that you just talked about that
Yeah.
I really want to sort of take us down this
Mm-hmm.
sort of line of. And it's this notion of the nonprofit space as like this. I think people want to do mission driven work, right? They only have the framework of traditional nonprofit spaces, right? This sort of charity based
Yes.
narrative of seeing a problem that the government or whatever systems don't solve and formulating this sort of charity framework to get that work done. And that, to my mind, comes with a lot of capitalistic implications. They come with a lot of structural
Yes.
problematic issues. And you frame the work you do and the work you want to do. Say it for me, because I want to. I don't want to misquote you, but I feel like you call it like a solidarity economy. So it's
Yes.
like this sort of capitalist charity versus solidarity economy
Yes.
where you're thinking about still having to think about resources, but doing it in a way that is clear-eyed about what those resources look like. But I just want you to talk a little bit about that because it's so brilliant and it's precisely the sort of cognitive shift I think we need to be thinking about.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So, when I talk about solidarity economy, it's actually like a concept that I think is international, well, is international, but I think here, we don't hear it or see it as much. But what really started to speak to me was that it is an alternative economy that can still happen now. Like you can build the elements now and continue to move into it. So you can't just start, it's not turning like a light switch off from capitalism to what's next. Like, how do you build and build into it? But it also speaks to building collective power and resources and like honoring that the folks that are most impacted need to become the decision makers. And that how do we support each other in our strengths and our work? Nonprofit, for profit, business, grassroots, individuals, consumers. Like this is an economy. We're living in a natural and built environment. How do these connect? Can we be environmental stewards? What is our social currency? What is our social power? What is our cultural power? And how do we use that to build the environment, the neighborhood, and the economy that we want? And I think in nonprofit work, people equate it for nonprofit. That means you make no profit, or you have to burn yourself out or work to your detriment. I think that's purposely built, and it's not, I don't think it's a surprise that there's so much good work or mission-driven work that lives in the nonprofit space and not in the for-profit space. But at the same time, it keeps us that much further from resources and capital to do what we know needs to be done or make the true instrumental changes we want to see. So, I think in my time in working in nonprofits, I used to work in for-profits and sports and entertainment, marketing, billing. And then as I moved into connecting with more work with like government agencies and then moving to nonprofit and completely, what I started to see was how divested we were and how it kept us in this lens of scarcity. And that even the matrix itself is so connected to capitalism. So we can talk about it in these theoretical ways, but we're actually living it. And when you see the connection more and more between the charity and, I need to feel charitable, I need to feel like a savior, I need to drop into your neighborhood and give you the things that you didn't have, that you would never have, as opposed to calling it what it is, which is I purposely am benefiting from a system that is exploitative and extractive. And so I have power, resources, and capital that I've been a part of or complicit in systemically keeping you from in your personal life, in your professional life. And so if I keep you distracted by that and keep those siloed, then your work will never be done. But you'll always need to come back to me and I decide how I give you that power, if at all, the resources, if at all. And so over the, you know, the course of a couple of years, like when I first started at Just Food, one of the first things I had to do as an ED is make a decision about a contract that was essentially keeping our lights on, to be 100%, that was rooted in the charity system. And it wasn't that it wasn't doing good work, and it wasn't that we didn't learn from it. It was connecting farmers to food pantries. It was connecting community chefs and giving them paid opportunities to do demos at food pantries. That's not the part that was the problem. The problem is the way that the funding comes down, the way that it makes you bend and contort your operations and mission in the midst of trying to do instrumental things. It's like, well, no, you can only do this. Money only goes to that. And so very early on, I kind of walked into an organization that had great mission and great intent, but had worked itself into being reliant, like a lot of nonprofits. And I had to make a choice without very many tools or leadership to say, that's not the mission work that I think Just Food can do. That's not why I came to be the ED. I wanted to push equity in all its forms, racial, economic, and environmental. And I wanted to see how far a nonprofit could go to do that and center, not just work with or highlight one or two Black and brown folks occasionally, but are we the center of the power? Are we the staff? Are we the leaders? Are we the decision makers? Are we the board members? And will funders fund that? And so to me, that if that was what I came in to do and figure that out and create space for other folks of color to be constructive and innovative to fail, I couldn't work in this one contract, which essentially became 90% of the budget. And so it's like been over time putting those pieces together, even in the midst of COVID, seeing like even in our food system, we have this crisis. The crisis is really rooted in existing inequities, geographic inequities. So this is why we talk about food apartheid, or why we should lift it up a little bit more, because it's not just about food, it's the intersection of food, wealth, health, where you live, and how you generate the resources and capital that you need. And this historic and systemic and current segregation of those resources to keep you away. So your neighborhood has been divested from. Your work, is significantly impacted when this system that is not for you has its own issues. And then you're supposed to double down into it. So we see that in the food system. So kind of going back to kind of what you were saying, it was like, for me, it's been this process over 3 years when I was the ED of learning the lessons of a lived experience of a Black woman, a single mother, working up into a food landscape and space, seeing how charity and money is doled out to certain people and how far their work goes or how far their work doesn't, but also does it create this microcosm even within our own spaces of color. So then there's certain folks that are deemed leaders, there are certain folks that get all the funds and clout, and then there's other groups doing all this hard work unheralded and struggling for resources and money. And then even when we're given those opportunities to connect, do we know how, or are we so scrambled for that money that we fight each other and cannibalize because we're working with that lens of scarcity instead of the lens of abundance? So we could, I came up in this space too where it was so theoretical, and it did give me that start of like, oh, I hear it, I see it, it's community-based, we want to be mission-driven, we want justice, we want food, we want to be determinants of our own change. But I started to realize as I became a leader in this space or running an organization, there's still too much reliance on the charity. There's still too much reliance on the tokens that have come up as leaders in our space to then keep us all there. And it's not about regenerative wealth. It's not about regenerative land. And it's kind of been stayed in a certain place where then it actually affirms the narrative that we can't move forward, or there is no more, or we've hit that. And some people benefit from that. And that's a hard pill to swallow. It's not just that we share the same language, we share the same skin color, we might even share the same work in the landscape, is that I just started to realize the work that I wanted to see needed to be done by other people, and it needed to push on the way we were getting funded. It needed to push on the actual structure itself. The board that was the initial board could not be that board, meaning people need to change, and not just in diversity and inclusion. Oh, we need some more, women, we need some more Black men, we need all this, but like, are these the people who are doing the work on the ground, and do they see their power in connecting to their work? And so to me, a food system that is regenerative and resilient and viable, that's where a solidarity economy comes from. And that was what I wanted to do with Just Food. I was running it, so why not? And why not amplify the folks that I felt were doing that? And why not find ways to find funding to really see? Because that was the other part too, to be honest. It was like, if I do this, and I do this with good people, and we build this, I don't doubt we can, and we learn from it. But if there's no resources to this, I want to know why. And I want to know if this is no longer the work that's needed. So that's where it became less about running a nonprofit and just keeping it going to, this needs to be a capacity builder for the grassroots. We need to leverage policy, not just keeping people engaged and informed, but building mechanisms and tools around grassroots campaigns, around, training and advocacy, so folks felt more informed themselves, connected to the work they do, whether that's growing, whether it's culinary work, whether they're youth, and giving them opportunities to manage, run projects, and build projects with them informed. So I essentially kind of cleared the slate, and even the staff, I transitioned the staff with transparency and accountability to be an organization that was truly capacity building. Leverage the existing nonprofit status for whatever that's worth, because you can get donations and such, in kind, monetary, but really kind of pushing it to social impact. And this organization really being an umbrella for innovative work of other folks of color and mixed income and collaboration.
Yes.
And hard to fund. Spoiler.
Well, that's the part, right? Because then it takes me to this framework that I'm interested in. Of course, you've given some thought to, but I'm thinking a lot about this notion, this sort of this feeling of activation, this moment where people are feeling they see direct needs, right? Like I think there's this feeling about this moment of COVID that, it's especially in the hospitality space, like we were already headed towards this moment where we had to kind of reckon with the ways in which we were operating, right? Restaurants were not sustainable the way that we were operating.
Yes.
The financial models and just the way the system was set up was always in need of some kind of kinetic moment of transformation. And so a lot of what we're seeing surely is about this moment, but also is about a change that was always on the horizon. That said, I think that there's something really interesting about folks who've been able to use this time to identify those issues and sort of attack them really intentionally now. And I guess I'm wondering about, a lot of what you just said is sort of, I had this question about, like, if you could imagine what solidarity economy could look like in one form. You kind of talked a little bit about that, but I guess I'm thinking about if somebody's listening right now who's in whatever community they're in, and they recognize need, right? Need that the city, state, local, whatever government is not taking care of. I think people have been activated in the food space because those are such basic needs. And it's seeing a necessity of like getting active and doing something that feels like movement right now. Where should folks start? What's the starting place for someone who has no reference point for food systems work, who have no reference point for where to even start? Because a lot of work you're doing now is about consulting and kind of thinking about how to help organizations kind of plot out those tools and plot out the frameworks they want to work in. but I guess, yeah, where would someone start? Like, I mean, I guess there are lots of books and things, but just if I was telling someone right now in the community where to start,
Right.
what do you think?
Sure. Something that might help is like kind of seeing it is like how do we move into action on the individual, community, and systemic level? And
Mm,
so then it can make it can hit you in different approaches, but it might be helpful to kind of see it like that. So like if I'm an individual and I want to get involved in the food system, I think on the first level, you're already in it. Like it's the acknowledgement that you're in it because you're an eating, breathing human being. You have rights to live. We're fighting for our rights every day. So I think even on that piece, sometimes people will be like, I want to do what you do, but I work in marketing, or I want to do what you do and I work in fitness or accounting. These are all elements of a solidarity economy. We need marketing. Part of the struggle of grassroots work is that people don't know what is already happening. So sometimes
mm,
people start, you know, crisis models, mutual aid or other, projects because they think something's not happening. What is, and in fact, is happening is we just don't have the resources or the capacity to keep marketing it the way you see on Amazon Fresh or, something
right.
else like a venture capitalist backed program. So on an individual level, I say it's one, just acknowledging the power that you have and the connection to the food system thus far because you eat. So it's, if you want, it's not even just about healthy food. It's about, do I want this food supply, this chain? Do I want to support healthy farms, healthy food, good food? Do I want businesses? Do I want this in my community? Well, how do I support that? Well, I support that by, so going, utilizing it,
Mm-hmm.
learning more. If you learn about one, there's probably three more. Doing even something I talk about in training sometimes is a community asset map. Even as simple as taking a 10 block radius walk, engaging conversations like this, learning what's already happening in your community and what's happening and what support could be needed. Sometimes we don't need to start a new thing. Sometimes it's supporting what's already there. And not to say that there aren't things that are there that should always be there, but you won't know until you engage
Yeah.
authentically. So on an individual level, I would say, do that. Like check out where the garden is. Check out where if there's a CSA in your neighborhood, community supported agriculture, if you want to connect to food, like a farmer's market, get to know what's in your community, talks like this, connecting to food justice organizations and groups that offer talks and events and sessions and networking. In the past, just food and probably in the future will offer like a conference. So those are opportunities too where it's like, oh, I didn't just read the same art, I didn't read an article about the same three Black people doing things. I'm actually going to push myself to learn about these other folks, or if that person is amplifying these other farmers like Christopher Joe, Cheryl Durant, Kelly Carlisle, Dana Eckridge, like if you do those things and you hear that, then you pick up on those. So you
Yeah.
look for, Acting Nonverba, you look for Dreaming Out Loud, you look for Kelly Street Garden, you look for Talani Lake Enterprises in the Navajo Nation. You do that, and you do that extra homework.
Yeah.
And you support as best you can. You learn where they're at, because sometimes it's not always about the dollar currency. It's also about general support and amplifying what is already happening. I think on the community level, a good example of that too is like, are there groups that are happening that you can join? Are there new efforts? I think a lot of folks have found themselves in the crisis, finding themselves in mutual aid groups and that can be helpful. But I think as the more you're in community-based groups, the more you start to ask yourself, just like I did in my work, I did this work for a certain point. I still have questions. We have to move and evolve. So it's the same thing when you're doing community-based work in your group. Okay, we're getting to know each other, we're building a base, we're hearing from the existing community here, we're finding more inroads to support folks now. And that shouldn't just be like the cool folks. That should be elders, that should be youth, that should be folks that have been in your neighborhood that are maybe a little annoying. But you just never got a chance to see them because they never felt seen. So are there inroads to doing
Mm.
that and using your community-based efforts to connect with folks? Not always coming from a place of savior and, oh, I see you need a need, thank God I'm here, let me put my cape on. But like, I'm just meeting you where you're at. There's probably things about what is happening here that you know longer than I. And
Yes.
those are like actual ways. Again, food advocacy, justice groups, trainings, and workshops give you the chance not to just learn for yourself, but to build peer-to-peer networks. You know, joining a farmer's market. I've talked to so many people just going to the market that I've seen in other places and spaces. Joining the CSA, some of the folks that are partners now, like Seeds to Soil, are folks that were in my community and we just happen to be picking our CSA share in our neighborhood. My very first farmer, Claudio, before I was even a Just Food employee, I found a connection to CSA. It helped me connect to food justice and getting food. So it wasn't just a model to get me fed, it became a community builder. And here we are, 10 plus years later, and I'm working with Michelle on a solidarity zone approach, well, collectively in a collaborative with Prime Produce, Seeds to Soil, and Just Food. I would have never thought that 15 years ago when we were talking about what do I do with beets because I never knew how to eat raw beets. Claudio Gonzalez, the farmer that was at that CSA, he's still a farmer. Right now, he's the CSA and the farm stand provider on Thursdays in Central Harlem on 122nd at Project Harmony. He's no longer my CSA farmer, but I still connect him to Kelly Street Garden. I found a way to connect him. That's like community. It doesn't
Yep.
happen always overnight. It's these iterative, intentional relationships that we build over time. And you build your lens of equity and sovereignty. How do I continue to get free? And am I working with other folks that want to get free too? And are there
Ooh.
different ways that we can connect? So one day I'm just a CSA member, and that was the one way we connected. Another way, we're community partners. Another way, I'm a comrade. You want to start a business or you're starting something else. I've been doing other work too. There's an intersection. Wait, we need to connect to a farmer. I know exactly one that happens to come down in the city on Thursdays and Mondays. At
Yes.
Kelly, at New Roots Community Garden and Grand Concourse. So these are all the different ways that over time people now can connect. It doesn't have to be just this one way, this one thing, or I had to go to that one training, I had to go
Mm.
to that one immersion. If I don't do that, there's nothing here. I didn't go to, like you said, I didn't go to school for this. I don't have a graduate degree. This was really, I got here, or I have the connections I have, or the relationships and experiences I have because I was willing to avail myself on the individual community and found ways to push on the systemic level. So when we talk about that, those are those deep segregation, right? Resources. For me, what opened the door was policy and wanting to connect the grass tops to the grassroots, or seeing more folks that were impacted being the folks that were informing policy. And like, how does that even
Yes.
happen? And where do those conversations happen? That it's voting, but it can also look like, again, like, are we bringing, say, a campaign or connecting to urban ag? Are we supporting other urban ag leaders in their work, like Soil Generation in Philadelphia? Are we learning about land stewardship? Is that policy work that's, getting, that we can learn from Philly to Detroit, bring it to New York? Where are things that are already here that we can learn from? So if we think about like a systemic example, say for instance, something like community gardens, the majority of community gardens in New York City are under Parks and Rec, New York
Yeah.
City Parks and Rec leases and land ownership. So community gardeners are really environmental stewards. However, they do not all have the decision-making power that one would if they own land. So how do we then continue to amplify ways to be stewards and like hold this complexity around land ownership, because is it really our land to own anyway? But in a systemic level, we can start asking, questioning, why are there barriers around community gardens connecting to building what is seen as profit? Or is that just regenerative wealth that goes back into the garden? And let me be clear about that. They can raise money that goes directly back into the garden. That's not what it is, because it is commons land. Some of the issues that some groups want and are struggling with is, I want to be able to have paid, stipends, garden ambassadors, youth. I want to be able to bring, incubation, enterprise, value add to this land, to this work, in conjunction with our partners. And I want to be able to use those funds for other things that keep that business viable or that initiative viable. I want folks to be able to come not just as free labor, but if I can give a stipend to a youth and this connects them to land more, why can't that be money given that way? Do I have the infrastructure and capacity to bring in folks that understand banking and connect to it? So again, we can talk about the rhetoric of gardens, and there's a lot of folks that do that. We can go there just for places of respite, and I'm not minimizing that. But, we see spaces like Oko Farms and Yemi, like there are opportunities to educate, to train, to incubate, and we need the flexibility to have land to innovate that way,
Yes.
to open it up where it's collective power. So we are building wealth in our community. We are building resiliency in our natural environment. But there's a way to bring in a monetary currency that speaks to what we want in our community. That shouldn't be taken away because there's a policy that maybe is a little antiquated or doesn't understand. But what we all can do on an individual, community, and systemic level is understand that and push for that, learn about that, advocate for it, so we can make that change. No different than, defunding the police or other systemic changes that we want to see, because these are all intersectional. Our food, our lives, our neighborhoods, our communities, where we live, where we get forced out of living, are all connected to these things. So this is why I've been more and more trying to unpack what food apartheid is and how it shows up, and not still be siloed where it only talks about geographic isolation,
yeah,
and redlining, but not about why I'm job insecure and how that exacerbates my food insecurity. And
right.
So to kind of bring it back to solidarity economy, this all lives in that. And we talked about food, we talked about policy, we talked about social currency, we talked about neighborhoods, we talked about businesses. We can have a food-based solidarity economy, but essentially it's still social, cultural, and monetary. It's really being driven by the folks that are of and by that place, instead of it always being determined by, capitalism or other folks from the outside. And same with nonprofits getting money. Yes, we have good nonprofits in our landscape, but they're hampered, and I can tell you, by the way we get funded to do our work, or to even be able to innovate. So this all lives in the solidarity economy, and I think these are practical ways that folks can connect, individually. And these are like sometimes a conversation like this is the start. It was for me.
Yeah. We've been talking to Qiana Mickie, the very brilliant Qiana Mickie. I want to leave room so people have questions. There were a couple of comments along the way that have been really interesting. And I hope some of them got answered in roundabout ways. But if you have direct questions, I'm leaving time so we can get folks to get their questions asked. You can drop them in the question little nubbin right next to the comment section, or in the comments right now. Hopefully we'll see them. There's somebody who made a comment a couple of streams back. She was saying that she wanted to get involved in community-based work, but said something like, if you could maybe say it again in the comments, but she said basically she felt like she needed permission, or like there was a sense of like, and
Mm,
I'm putting a lot on her 2 line comment, but it's something I'm thinking a lot about.
yeah,
This sort of, they feel sometimes like, um such serious and mission driven work is, there's a barrier to it. There's a lot of jargon. There seems to be people who
yes,
have like, you our imagination on what that work looks like is so serious, and you don't want to be a dilettante coming to these spaces and
yes.
disrupt it, but you also want to be of service. And I guess I'm wondering if you have any sort of, I mean, you kind of covered it, and that's why I didn't ask it when she mentioned it, because I think
Mm,
about it. My enroll was
yeah.
Karen Washington and Black Farmers, Urban Growers. Like, it was
Mm-hmm.
this thing of like being in the midst of this city, working in the Kone space, and it being this very decadent, very kind of luxurious, very
Yeah.
selfish and self indulgent space, and wanting to do my own homework, my own due diligence of
Mm-hmm.
connecting with more rooted work. And so it became this really interesting sort of point of connection. And all the other work that I've done since has stemmed from just that curiosity. And it just, I wanted to lift up her comment just because it
Yes.
feels sometimes like people are maybe putting too much, they think it's too broad, too they're thinking these spaces are exclusive, and they really aren't. The seriousness you're seeing is people just with their heads down doing their work. And a lot of times, maybe, I'm just wondering if you have any insight on how
Yeah.
maybe folks doing mission driven work could be more inclusive to folks who don't
Yes.
have reference.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I feel like, something we see in mission driven work is a microcosm of white supremacy. And I say that to say that I've been in spaces that are supposed to be community conversations or engagement, and people have talked about it in a way that kept newer folks out. Or we
Mm,
only see folks as like, I'm just at this one level and everybody's this leader. So I think there's something like you said, I think there's a part of doing due diligence. I think there's a part of doing more research because you're right. You don't want to be a pioneer into space and you don't want to just drop in and act like you knew all the things or you did one, civil ease article and then you're like, you know it all. But at the same point, there's a due diligence and then there's a way to find ways to connect to groups. And I think the things that I encourage folks to look and see is find spaces and places and groups that are actually really groups. If there's a group and all you hear about is that one person or the only thing you see is that one leader, then sometimes that could be a flat. Like, is this really community work, community engagement, and do they genuinely engage community? And some groups do and some groups don't. But I think if you have that due diligence, you have that research, you have that work, you start to learn and see that there's different intersections. And there might be ways that, oh, I actually have capacity around communications. I notice that you're doing work or that you maybe need a new flyer. Could I support in that way? Sometimes the inroads can be a skill share or a partner share, an intellect share. That's also mutualism and solidarity. I think, I think what we can do as groups is continue to push ourselves in our groups to not be isolating or perpetrate the microcosms that we see and then create spaces that are talking about liberation but are really cultish in a way.
mm,
Are we actually building spaces for folks to come in? So for example, one of the things that I continue to try to do or what I look for in other groups is what does collaboration really look like? If the only ways to collaborate are paid trainings or if the only way to collaborate is listening to that one or two people, then that's not really anymore the collaborative space I feel to be in. But if there are ways to connect to the information and they connect me to other people, like peer-to-peer networks, like, oh, if I join this community, if I learn a little bit more, I think in solidarity, if I look at the CSA network, the farmers market network, even, many community gardens, yeah, sometimes people can feel ownership about a space or worry about new people, but there are others that use it as an opportunity to open up. And I think those are the spaces you want to lean into. And,
Yes.
as you're looking at new ones or places that you're interested in, really kind of see, like, what does your community level really look like and how engaging is it? Because there are so many others that are and will. I can't tell you the number of times somebody has come to us for training around starting a CSA, and we'll help them with resources and stuff. But they really want to hear from the community. They want to hear from people who do it. I mean, I help, but they want to hear from other folks, and they're more than willing to share, because in spaces of genuine community, we know it takes more than one of us or two of us to do it. And we need
Yes.
folks working at all cylinders and at all strengths, and being there. So sometimes it can be, it could be, I don't want to say transactional, but a share. And that could be an inroad in just like, not just volunteering in general, like, way, but like, I see that you have this concerted help, or I have bandwidth to help you in a way that maybe you don't have the bandwidth for. I mean,
Mm.
food justice in a nonprofit can easily look like helping with communication. Shout out to Sarah, who helps us with our communications and promotions. That looks like, stipend work or CSA core group leaders who share that knowledge with each other. So I know, I totally see there are times when organizations that are mission driven get
Mm.
so in their own circle that it becomes exclusive. And I would say it's something we all need to push and challenge when we see that. But I think on the individual level, it's doing the due diligence to find groups that genuinely have community engagement and mechanisms to bring you in. Because that's
Yes.
where the true power comes from. And that's a group that you would want to be a part of.
Yes. Um, so we had a question.
Mhm.
It's basically about do you like basically could you name like sort of black based like black community networks that are doing it right that sort of would be resource hubs. I mean, I always think about Karen Washington and Bugs, but there's also like a growing culture. I think there's some interesting work in terms of thinking about the global food system.
Yeah.
But you have much more insight. So just, I mean, people are looking for sort of hub type resources where they can kind of go to one spot and sort of, I
Yeah.
guess,
Yeah, no, that question comes up a lot. I mean,
uh-huh,
I
uh-huh,
think the struggle with a one-stop shop for information like this is because so many of us are limited in capacity and resources, but also stretched. And so
yeah.
it doesn't always, we don't always find ways to find the right platform that speaks for all of us and all our work.
That's because that's the other part, right? Because I was thinking about that. The question is a really good one, but it also I think goes back to what you were saying about really kind of deciding where your spirit lies, like where like what
Yes.
and what's where your point of entry really is. Like there are folks who want to get in this soil, who are about their life and just know for sure that they are interested in
Yeah.
like getting like legit farm training. So like yeah, so far farms becomes like a really interesting option to sort of go to or think about. I mean, her Farming While Black is just a really good book. So you can start with the book and then actually go up and be in community and so far. It just all those ways. But I think the probably the better question, sort of the more rooted question is where do you see where are you most interested in
Yeah.
engaging in the food system because there's so much work to do
Exactly.
that there's like you kind of go down the rabbit hole of just that lane and then you get so much more. I mean, if you're interested in like food security itself, then that's a very particular list versus a farming list. Versus, I don't know. I
Exactly.
just yeah.
No, exactly. I think it's like you're right. Where does your heart find you first? Where does your passion find you first? And then take that as a road and a journey.
Yep.
Because I think, what we find is, say for instance, folks bring up Soulfire a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
I know, it's hard not to.
Yeah.
But I think if that's like your gate, and that entry point, then you actually start to hear and see like there are folks like, you know, Cuba and Black urban growers in Pittsburgh. Or you start to see like, oh wait, there's other networks of groups like Urban Tree Connection and, you know, Noel. Again, Kelly Carlisle acting on Verba in Oakland. So if that one door is growing, and you connect with a story and a person and you see that story often, that's great. I would say continue to let that be your journey in going deeper. So then you
Yes.
learn more about maybe folks that have been doing it longer or doing it at a at a larger scale. If you just stop at the same folks, like if, Karen
Yeah.
Washington is awesome. He was such an entry point for me. But if we just stop there, then we'll never support the emerging
The
leaders and
yes.
the breadth of folks that are in our space. And if we stop there in terms of support as well, then how are we any different than, a top or consolidated way around resources and information and in this one-stop shop? So, the answer is there is no one-stop shop. And if anybody's giving you that lens or feeling, then I would question that. And I
Yeah.
think if you reach out or you learn about one person in that conversation or article or immersion program doesn't put you on to 5 other
Um.
people, we should question that. And it
Yeah.
can't be the same 5 people. Like, it's a small space, but it ain't that fucking small.
Yeah.
There's so many Black farmers like Cedric Rowe in Albany, Georgia. If that's a name you never heard, then you should look into it. There's Christopher Joe, The Adventures of Cool Breeze in Alabama. If that's a name you've never heard, like Duran Chavis, and was it Richmond, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yes.
when I first heard about him, I was like, that's my hometown, and I don't even know about this.
Yeah.
So, there's, Arian and Raphael, and like, if these are names that you don't hear or see in other articles and other stories when you do volunteer, when you do, then that in itself tells you you have a further journey to go. If farming only if your lens of farming is only urban, and you haven't pushed yourself to learn what other folks are doing on a larger scale or rural scale, then you got a further journey. And if that journey takes you off of agriculture production, say like for me, I've never been the growing hands. I'm not. I'm a little policy fingers. I'm a little technical things. But, I think that there's ways that we can bring infrastructure, connections, marketing, collaboration, building community with each other, that then it broadens our lens in our community. And that's really what we want to see. Is not just a breadth of farmers, but like a breadth of market operators, a breadth of community leaders, a breadth of artists, a breadth of culinary folks and chefs, a breadth of, restaurants and cuisines and food pathways, and how that connects us from New York to Oakland to, Albany, Georgia to, Alabama to LA and everywhere in between, and Hawaii. I'm just thinking about my
Yeah.
friends.
No, because that's the thing, right? Because I think there have been a couple comments coming through, people saying that like a lot of resources that people, to your point, a lot of people reference our East Coast based or our names that we kind of filter through and know a lot because they get a lot of exposure. Excuse me. I guess then I'm wondering because for me it's been the same kind of thing of like once you know one person, you can't unknow it in communities with
Yeah.
so many people nationally and globally that you just come across these stories, right? So I mean, honestly, in my opinion, like I don't. Qiana is clearly the expert, but there feels something like really interesting about really using our social media platforms in more effective
Yes.
ways. Like we discount them a lot, but I mean, honestly, like you can't follow somebody like Duran or you know what I mean, like with some of these farmers that like you. So your point about okay, go to your farmers market, like somebody saying that in Texas. Well, I mean, go to your farmers market, your local farmers market,
Yeah.
and
I was
find
just
the
about
brown
to
like.
say that.
But like
Yes,
once you
you're
know
in
that farm,
Texas. I just was in Austin, Texas, and went to a farmer's market. I saw the most Black vendors and farmers and folks at that farmers market. And now I know to come back, and I told my son to go there. He lives nearby. So it's not so much, and I want folks to get away from that. And that's why I kind of don't talk about like hubs or networks in that way, because we get caught in that. And then it becomes, oh, I only talk about the same 3 organizations to talk about those same 3 people.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's the due diligence of the homework. So it's like,
Yeah.
I appreciate you're in Texas, and I appreciate that some of our organizations aren't national. Some are, some aren't. But what I would say is, on your ground, on your level, in your community, like, do that asset mapping. And even starting there at a farmer's market, that I never thought, I've seen more folks of color farmers at, rural scale or in their own communities. When I've gone to Albuquerque, I've met Black and Indigenous and Latino farmers and producers. When I went to Austin, I met Black, and Latino farmers and producers. Not everyone has a website or landing page. So I think the digital organizing is important, because that is the way that if we connect with each other, great.
Yeah.
But there's a way to amplify even those that maybe don't have the capacity to use it that way. So if I go to the Austin market, I'm going to tag that market, and then I'm going to have that conversation with that farmer or that producer, and then I'm going to get to know them and come back and support them or encourage other people. And then people will find them because I tag them in my work, because maybe people look to me. Or when I go somewhere, I say, let's go to this market, let's go to the CSA, let's go to this business. I mean, that's how I, became, partners, and I feel like family, like in Port Morris Distillery in the Bronx. They started their business selling at the South Bronx Farmers Market.
Yeah.
I met them at a holiday market and was just so into their mission and like how they were connecting to local fruit to build their business. Then it didn't just become a place to get a drink. I mean, which is great. You should all do that. And selling nationally, shipping, but it became a place where it was community. So it became not just friends and comrades and family, but now in our work, we can intersect. And that came, again, on an individual level, and that can move in a systemic level, because now we're finding different ways to support each other in our business, whether it's at a conference or you're donating food for like for our gala, like all these different ways. Or even now in a term of crisis, they've pivoted some of their operations to hand sanitizer, and they put other people on. I've met other businesses that are working locally, regionally, just from that one connection, just from going to that farmer's market, just from talking to that group and people. So I say that to say, like, I don't want, and I feel the same way sometimes. Even being in this work is reading, and I'm like, oh, I read about the same organization, the same farm, the same people. I'll never be that. That's not me. They have so much more resources and clout than I do. And some people yield that clout in a way that keeps us down. And I think it's really the reverse of that is, how do I start from my community on to connect to this? Because then that information makes sense. So, I'm going to do a shameless plug for a training that I'm doing with Just Food coming up. Wednesday, Thursday, next Tuesday. Go at Just Food NYC, and I'll put it on my site. But it's an opportunity, free training sponsored by the Ag and Markets, to talk about how do we actually concretely build solidarity models. So if there's existing ones, how do we support them, like CSAs, farm stands, farmers markets? And it's virtual, right? So you can be in Texas, you can be in Alabama, you can be in Hawaii, you can be in Oregon, and hopefully much of what we're talking about is relevant, or you're going to find the connections to the folks that are already doing it and make it relevant for you. And again, it doesn't mean you have to start it, but if you're learning and building community, it will help you figure out, how do I see what my community still needs and doesn't? do we need a new community food project? And what kind of community food project do we need? Is there a farmer already coming in our community and he needs another CSA site? Is that what we do? Or is it a farm stand and now he has two different ways to reach community? Like, so these trainings are really kind of built, or how we kind of encourage folks to get in the solidarity economy is practical tools and mechanisms that speak to food justice, that are models that are community led and driven, no matter where your space is. Because building resiliency and building collaborations happens anywhere and everywhere. And I'm
Right.
probably like talking all the things, but
No, you brilliant. You
but
brilliant, and it's not shameless plug.
I
We
feel
want.
that sometimes, and people are like, "This is great," and I feel revved up. But what do I do next? I say you can check out the Just Food map if you're in New York City and look at the value chain map and see what CSAs are around. You can look at community-run farmers markets, go to other markets, and then the more
Yeah.
you're involved, the more then you're able to say, "Oh, we can do more," or "We should connect more." And then it's no longer about those same 3 people, 5 people tokens. It's actually, we actually found intentional power and built it together.
Qiana, I love you. I want to be respectful of your time. We have hit the hour mark. This has been so
Okay.
dope. It's Qiana Mickie, QianaJMickie.com
Yes.
is her website. So make sure you get the J. You can follow her here on Instagram, please. Also follow Just Food because the training she was talking about will be linked there.
Yes.
But I just want people to sort of take away. No, I don't want anything. If there's one thing you want people to sort of take away from what you said today, I mean, it's so many gems. I feel like people. I hope you all have been taking notes because this has been so dope. But I don't know. I don't know if you can distill it all into one like last thing, but just there's something really interesting about
Yeah.
this notion about intentional power because folks have been like once you know a farm in Texas or wherever you are, you meet these farmers, meet these folks who are doing this grassroots work. You only need the one person because if they for real in community, they're gonna open up this sort of landscape with so many brilliant people who you can also be in community with.
Yeah. I
So
would
yeah,
say distilling it in all is that, honor the power you have in yourself and be willing to grow in that power to be a change maker because we are all change makers.
amen. I appreciate you so much for doing this, and I love you. I will see you in person soon, but thank you
I
so much.
know. We got to do this.
Yes, I'm gonna be following your work just like I've always been, and can't wait to see what that training next week.
Thank you. And same here. I thank you for asking me. I'm so happy and I can't wait to maybe we can take a walk, but I'm gonna keep following you and
Yeah,
keep tagging me in like Twitter jokes.
that's right. Absolutely. All right, sis. See you soon.
Thank you. See you. Bye everybody. Thanks.
So good, y'all. Okay, so we've gone over the hour mark, but I appreciate y'all hanging in there with me. I will be back next week with Akin Akinyasa from African Restaurant Week. We have a whole series of conversations happening in support of that organization the following week. So he'll be here talking about African foodways and sort of thinking more diasporically. Um, if you have loved this conversation, you should be following Black Food Folks. So you can jump off of this and go on over to Black Food Folks. Follow Instagram. We have programming almost daily and have been since April. So follow. This conversation is brought to you in collaboration with Black Food Folks. If you have some time and want more content today at 1, ooh, I'm sorry. Y'all should get off now and go over there right now. The very brilliant Enrica Williams is in conversation with Zoe Ajanio from Ghana Kitchen. Zoe's Ghana Kitchen. So get off of here. See y'all next week and go watch Black Food Folks right now.